Welcome everybody to the BFSLA webinar today. The topic for today is the Reserve Bank of New Zealand decision making. Is a governance board the best option for prudential regulation? Just at the outset, a couple of housekeeping matters. I will be presenting it with Helen Durbin. This presentation is based on an article that Helen and I wrote, mostly, to be fair to say, Helen wrote for the BFSLA Research Essay Prize. So that it's based on an article that hopefully will be published shortly. In terms of the mechanics of today's session, you should have an option of putting questions into a Q&A box into the webinar. If you can do that, what we would like to do is probably leave 10 or 15 minutes at the end to answer questions. If we can't get on to all of them and you have a burning question that you really wanted us to answer, then please feel free to email us afterwards and we will attempt to answer it then. Secondly, and for those who are aware of people who wanted to attend today's seminar and might not have been able to make it, I'm told it is being recorded, in fact recorded live, I think, on YouTube, but will be available on YouTube. There will not, however, be a Netflix version of it, apparently. So that's the broad logistics. In terms of the structure of the presentation today, Helen, first slide maybe. The scope of the presentation today is we're looking at what we think is best practice governance for a full service central bank, which is what the Reserve Bank of New Zealand is. That is slightly different from Australia, where they have separated prudential regulation and central banking, but we're looking at it in the New Zealand context. In terms of the structure of the presentation, the first part is I am going to do, and we're going to really sort of set the scene, the context for the discussion paper that we prepared. That will be looking at what a central bank does, then look at the history of the Reserve Bank since 1986 through to the 2017 IMF review. Helen will then deal with the next two bits, the dealing with inherent biases, and look at some of the literature in relation to best practice for regulators and how to deal with what all of us have, inherent biases, but particularly inherent biases that regulators might have. Helen will also then look at international comparators, predominantly Australia and the UK, and realistically predominantly the UK, as it probably has the best aligned comparison to New Zealand. And then lastly, what we think is best for New Zealand is something that will be shared between Helen and I, so we'll switch a bit between the two of us in terms of what we think the right answer is. And then, as I've mentioned, there will be questions at the end, so feel free as you go to type in questions and we will endeavour to answer those as we go. Slide, perhaps. So starting with the role of central banks, they've been described as curious institutions. I think curious in the terms of inquisitive as opposed to strange. They're also being described as incredibly powerful institutions. And in that context, certainly from a global perspective, for much of the last 12 years, central banks have been really at the forefront of a lot of what's been happening in economic activity. Monetary policy and the role of central banks in economic crises are the things that make central bank governors famous. And